Hello everyone, thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch this video. This video is a recorded lecture that was held in our Discord server about how to optimize your learning and have the most success in the Scholar Challenge and the Scholars Bowl. This lecture was held in our Discord server, the link is in the description. So I'm not going to waste your time, let's jump straight into the lecture. Today's main topic of the lecture and why I think all of you have gathered here is how to optimize your learning. More specifically, today we're going to be learning about making a optimal learning system for everyone. So, firstly, I would like to go over how everyone probably learns. So, let's start with writing learning. How I've studied until implementing the system was the following. I would get a book or some notes and I would just read them. I would mechanically read them over and over and over again until they got in my head. The most basic way of learning that I've seen people do is just mechanical learning. Now, what mechanical learning is just reading a following text, reading it until you understand it and remember it. And the problem with that is that while it works, it's very inefficient. So what we're going to be doing today is finding better alternatives to mechanical learning and actually learn how to learn, something I bet a lot of you have not done until today. So, what actually is learning? Well, learning, I would like to divide it into two different concepts. And that is understanding and remembering. I think we can all agree that when we learn things, we try to first understand them. So this may be the first time you're reading like a lecture or a presentation, and you still aren't clued up on what exactly you're learning. So maybe you will try to skim the presentation to have a grasp on what you're learning about, or maybe you will just read through it very fastly. The point is, in this process, we're trying to understand everything that is going on. So if you have fully understood something, then with a book in front of you or the source material where you learned it from, you would be able to teach it to someone else. Now, the problem is, how do we do it without that source material? Well, we need to remember the source material. Well, not exactly the source material, but we need to remember what we have understood in order to practically use it and maybe even teach it in the future. So today we're going to be learning about how to better understand things and use different resources to fasten your understanding process, and how to better remember things. Because this is actually just how learning works. You have to first understand, and then secondly you have to remember everything that you have understood. So firstly, let's go over understanding. There are a few key concepts that we should all know, and that is note-taking. Or firstly, let's just talk about note-taking. All right, so let's write that. Note-taking can take on many forms, whether that is physical note-taking, digital note-taking, or I guess that's all of them. It doesn't really matter as long as you're using it to understand things. The big mistake that people make is that they see note-taking as learning they see note-taking as the whole process of learning. They don't see it as part of learning, they see it as learning. So I've seen a lot of people open up their notebook and just take notes from the resources and say, oh, I learned this. No, you understood it. Now you need to go over and remember it. And that's the second process of learning. Now, how do we, so actually before we do anything, let's compare the ways that we can note take. So as I mentioned earlier, earlier, you can do digital note taking, or you can also do physical note taking, right? So what would be the main differences? I would say that there will be a few main differences. First is speed, and second is remembering. Because while digital note taking will be faster, physical note taking will help you retain more information. And I'm pretty sure most of you have noticed this, right? So, for example, when you go to school and when you take notes in a notebook, you remember a lot more than, for example, when you do the World Scholars Cup resources and take notes on Notion. But physical note taking is very simple. So, what you do with physical note taking is you just take a notebook, as I have right here. You take a pen and then you write you write stuff down. You go over the source material and then you write key points, and you use that as an aid to help you remember things. But today I'm not gonna focus on physical note taking because it has one key problem, and that is the speed at which you can do it. Now, people may argue the fact that the physical note taking is better because you retain more information, but the problem is, well, not the problem, but the thing about digital note taking is why it's better is you get digital note taking done, and now you understand everything, and you can move to remembering. And this is actually the step where you retain information. You shouldn't try to retain any information in the understanding. So the first step of learning, because there you should put all your focus and attention into grasping the concept and sort of being able to teach it to someone else if you have the source material in front of you. So today we're going to be focusing on digital note taking. And the app that I do recommend you use is called Notion. I'm not sure how many of you here have heard about it, but it is very good. It's a note-taking app, and personally, I do all my note-taking in Notion. The great thing about Notion is here, if we open up my World Scholars Cup page in Notion, you have toggles, right? This is very basic. These are very basic things that exist in many different note-taking apps, but I prefer Notion because of a lot of things, mainly, I guess, the design and a few different features. But to summarize essentially how this app works is you have different commands, and to bring up the commands you do slash, and after slash then you can pick what you want to write. So I would usually do a toggle list, and here I would write something like so for example, if I were taking notes on this lecture, I would do learning, so we're learning about learning, and then in this toggle we can write something else in, so what learning consists of. If we open up another toggle, understanding and remembering. So I'm not going to go over exactly how to use Notion, but I do recommend using it because of all of the features. You can just go on YouTube and write how do I use Notion, and I think that Notion you can access on notion.so. So there you go. Now you have your note taking down. Now, there's also many different ways to understand things other than note taking. So let's go over them too. One way that I would do understanding is by drawing sketches. So let's write that down. Sketches, at least what they help me with is, if I don't understand a certain thing, sketches will help me illustrate it so I can have it all within, I guess, one drawing. And sketches really, I can't explain to you how to sketch things for understanding. You have to do them yourself. You have to test it out because it's something personal, and every person does it different. as I'm doing now, I guess you could say I'm sketching how to learn and how to optimize your learning system. This is one type of sketching. So when you're learning something that is a bit more advanced than, I guess, for example, uh, history redux. History redux was very simple for me to understand. But let's say from last year, if you're trying to understand, I guess maybe Dyson spheres, if anyone remembers that, maybe for you to understand that better, you could have a drawing that you can look back on and think, oh yes, this was what that was, so you can understand it better. Sketches personally have been a big help to me, but not actually in the World Scholars Cup, more towards school and biology. So whenever I'm learning a new biology concept, I usually always draw something that resembles it so that I can remember it easier and understand it more. And with understanding, I believe that these are the most used understanding methods and techniques, and I don't think that there's anything more to be said about understanding, and we can go over to remembering. So, now that you have understanding down, now that you understand all of the material, you need to start remembering it. Because what does it matter if you understand how a Dyson sphere or how dioramas work or what they are? Um, what does why does that matter when you can't remember them and use them in debates? Um, why a lot of people can't use examples from the resources in debates is because they do this understanding process, right? But and then when the time comes for them to use them, they can't think of anything that backs up their argument that was from the resources because they didn't remember anything. They just skimmed the whole material and they kept on understanding things without remembering anything of the materials. So that's the second step to learning, and this has a bit more complicated concepts. One of those is active recall. So active recall is essentially a fancy way of saying testing yourself. So whether that would be through Quizlet or any sort of flashcards or making up practice tests or um, testing yourself with teammates, it's a way that you can supercharge your remembering process because different studies have shown that active recall is actually the best remembering method that exists. It beats reading, highlighting, and other remembering methods that people use, and it is the best one out there. So we need to use active recall, right? How do we do that? Well, the main way you use active recall is by using flashcards, right? So flashcards, whether they are from Quizlet, from Anki, it doesn't matter, or maybe somebody will use physical flashcards. The point of flashcards is that you have a term on one side, and then if you flip it or click a button, it will show you the definition. And the point of them is to go through them and you see the term, in your head you say what the definition is, and then you see if you're right. If you're wrong, then you do it again. If you're right, then you go to the next one. Now, active recall by itself is effective, but there's a way to make it even better, and that is by using spaced repetition. So, what spaced repetition is essentially it's in the name, right? You um, you revise something, but you don't do it just once, right? So you learn something, and then after a few days you're gonna forget it. What spaced repetition aims to do is to use the remembering or the forgetting process to your advantage. And there have been studies that analyzed when it's best to revise things so that you can remember them. And what they have shown is that the best time to revise something after you have just learned it is the next day, right? So if I learn something today, I will revise it tomorrow, and then after that, I will revise it within 3 days. After I have revised it that time, maybe after a week, I will revise it again, and then after a week, 2 weeks, then a month, and then it will go from my short-term memory into my long-term memory, and it will um, sort of back up in my brain to the long-term memory. So if there's anyone tech savvy here, you would sort of think of the short-term memory as your RAM, your computer RAM, as your long-term memory as your hard drive or SSD. So the short-term memory would be something that is stored right now, and long-term would be something that you can always go back on. And that's why, for example, I guess some of you can remember some things from last year, but also some things you can't remember. It's because the things that you can't remember, you didn't back up into your long-term memory. You only had them in your short-term when you were in the understanding process of them. You didn't take your time to remember them using active recall, flashcards, and spaced repetition. And that's why many people fail or not fail, I guess they don't achieve the success that they want at the Scholars Challenge and at the Scholars Bowl. It's because they don't implement this process of understanding and then remembering. So you may be asking yourself, how do I implement active recall and spaced repetition? I mean, it sounds like an interesting concept and I want to start using it, but where do I start? Well, there is this app that actually uses both of these concepts, and it is called Anki. What Anki is like a version of Quizlet, but on steroids. Because not only does it have the capability of using flashcards, it also has the capability of, so flashcards would be active recall. It also has the capability of using spaced repetition and telling you when you need to revise certain things. So now that we know active recall and spaced repetition, so how we would go by learning something is we would understand it, and then we would try to remember it using active recall, flashcards, spaced repetition, and that would all be on Anki. So now that we know all of that, we can get into a few techniques that furthermore supercharge your success. Now, one of these is called interleaving. So let's write that down. And essentially what this is mixing up your flashcards so that you're not only learning one specific thing at a time. Now, this may be very confusing. What do you mean one specific thing at a time? No, I'm not talking about learning math and history at the same time. I'm talking about learning about different aspects of history at the same time. So with interleaving, what you would be doing in the World Scholars Cup is you wouldn't be making flashcards about one article and then studying it. You would make flashcards for a few bullet points of the Scholars Cup, and then you would learn them all. Because why this works is if you have, let's say, 3 flashcards from one article, it will take you very little time to go through, but it would be more stored in your short-term memory than in your long-term. Because if, let's say I'm trying to learn what interleaving is and I'm trying to learn the exact definition, after 2 minutes I could probably get it down, but ask me again what it is within 2 minutes and I'll probably forget most of it. What interleaving does is it mixes up. So let's say you need to do these flashcards. In between those flashcards, you add these flashcards, and it breaks up the process of learning about one specific topic. And essentially what you're doing is learning about something, shortly forgetting that, and then going back to learning it again. And that supercharges your remembering, and it is one of the most effective ways to learn, or more specifically, remember anything. So, to recap everything that we have stated until now is many people go about learning the wrong way. They don't have any specific system that they use, and they just go by what they've been taught, and that is to just take out a book and read it over and over and over again until they can sort of understand it and remember it in the short term. Why this is bad is because you're not actually learning anything. You're understanding it and you're remembering very little bits of it, and I guess you can make your way, or you can make do with what you have, and it's you don't really learn it, you just sort of learn it, right? So it's not the most effective way to do things. What we learn to do today is to fully understand a certain topic that we're trying to learn by note taking and using sketches. And after we have understood it, we learn how to remember things. So, how we remember is we use active recall, spaced repetition, and interleaving. All three concepts that are used together, all in one app that is called Anki. And in Anki, what you would do is you would make flashcards and then revise those flashcards using spaced repetition. If you're able to do all of this, then I guarantee you, you will have no trouble placing in the top 10 for the Scholars Bowl and for the Scholars Challenge. So, that's it for this short lecture. More specifically, that's it for the understanding part, right? So if you would want, you can try to, I guess, take more notes of this or maybe even remember it. But this isn't something that you would learn by understanding and remembering. This is something that you learn by doing. So if you would want to learn this learning system, you would actually have to start using it. What I recommend everyone to do today is to download the app Anki. And even if they don't have any regional round, global round, or anything to study specifically, I recommend everyone just try to make a few flashcards and go over them. Because what? It will take you half an hour, but what you get from it is huge. If you understand to use this learning system, then you will be you will be able to retain so much more information than anyone you know. So, for people that are watching this on YouTube, because this is going to be recorded and put on YouTube, I hope you enjoyed this lecture and I hope it helps you in the future. And now I'm going to end the recording so I can have a discussion with people that are here.